My guest today has experienced something rare. So rare, she equates it to lightning striking in the same place twice. Melody Leclair, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So what was this rare event?
Well, we have two children that were diagnosed with bipolar in their adolescence. My oldest at age 15, and 4 years later, again, my youngest son with the same diagnoses. What was so interesting was that with no documented family history, it really seemed to come out of the blue.
Wow. And that's very rare that the doctors would almost never see two siblings diagnosed.
At least the psychiatrists that were involved in our case had never seen that in the same family.
Okay, so let's start with your daughter, Jose. What happened to her?
So when she was 15, there was a few months leading up where she was having some uncharacteristic thoughts, feelings, actions. So we had a little pace on her, but eventually she had a manic episode, which means a tipping point of psychosis, just a little out of touch with reality, and crisis led to hospitalization and a transfer to a child adolescent inpatient program where she was able to get proper diagnosis and treatment.
And tell me about the process of getting her stabilized.
Yeah, it's a process. No two diagnoses are the same, and our chemistry, our makeup changes the way medication can interact and be of use. So it sometimes feels like a bit of an experiment to find the right recipe that is going to work for the right person. But in her case, within 8 days, they were able to diagnose and bring her to a place of stability. Of course, that never means it's a linear journey after that. We have to tweak and change and adjust according to how she grows and hormones and stressors. There's lots of factors. But thankfully, as we become more comfortable knowing her stressors, we can adapt and adjust the medication she requires.
So you get through this very kind of traumatic, I guess, unexpected event with your daughter. You get her stabilized, like, okay, take a deep breath. And then what happens with your son, Luke?
Yeah, so as I said, 4 years later, my son also had, in a state of psychosis, actually believed he was struck by lightning. So imagine a blood-curdling scream that wakes me up in the middle of the night, where he is in a frenzy state and truly believes that he's been struck by lightning. He yanked me out of bed, pulled me onto the front porch in my pajamas to demonstrate to me what he was seeing, thinking, feeling, and demanded that I take him to the hospital for treatment. Of course, I agreed he needed treatment, just didn't agree for what. So I also took him to the hospital, and there led 3 hospitalizations and 63 days later for them to find the right formula that worked for him.
So your daughter is diagnosed and stabilized in 8 days, but he was a totally different thing. Like you kind of thought, okay, I know what this is, I have it. But were you thinking when he started going into psychosis, like, oh, this is the same thing, or you didn't know?
It was very hard to detect because her symptoms and his were just so different. In my book, I liken his symptoms to that of an angry drunk who was just disheveled and inconsolable, where Jose was like a happy drunk, like she was pleasant and seeing angels and fairies and like in La La Land, as I like to describe it. So again, really hard to name that it would be the same disorder, but yet I think that the disorder just works with people's personalities and exaggerates pieces and parts.
Well, we want to continue this story. When we come back, we're going to talk about the grief that ensues when a loved one's life is permanently changed, and we're going to give you some tips on how to work through a mental illness diagnosis. We are back with Melody Leclair, a mom who had the extremely rare experience of having 2 of her children diagnosed with early onset bipolar disorder. Okay, so you have this happen, and you know, anytime something like this happens in a family, you kind of have to go through your own grieving experience of how you thought your child's life would be. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. I think that was the most shocking part, was having to deal with myself and my own emotional reaction to what was going on. It wasn't just the pain of seeing my children out of their right minds per se, but the pain of having to examine my own thoughts and feelings and visions and dreams that I had for my child, and see that it's going to be different.
And you are a person of deep faith. So how are you processing this with faith? Did you have those moments of kind of shaking your fist at God and saying, like, why me? Why 2 kids?
Absolutely. I questioned, I wondered, I cried out. I I always say that if I had been a Bible writer, I would have been in the Psalms for sure. I'm like David. I would be the lamenter, just crying out, saying, God, where are you in all of this? But I think what's amazed me in this process is that God is already close. He's by the brokenhearted. He's holding and sustaining during those periods.
I think, you know, when hard things happen in life, it's kind of the time that it shakes our faith, because we have this assumption somehow that God's going to make everything okay and we're never going to have to go through hard stuff. So how did you reconcile what had happened to you, you know, with a loving father?
I think I've come to terms with the mystery of God, that although faith is a resource, it doesn't immune us from pain. And so when we can understand that Jesus was a suffering Christ, he was acquainted and knows. And so the assurance of this is not a path that is unknown, that God is close.
You write about a lot of that processing in this book, When Lightning Strikes Twice, and I really appreciated how it wasn't just your perspective, but it's your whole family perspective, including Luke and Jose as well. What tips would you give to people who are going through this themselves, a mental health diagnosis in their family?
I would just want them to acknowledge that it's so important to get help for everyone. And there's such a strength in being able to identify and name that something is going on. And so be curious, follow those leads, get a health checkup like you would anything else. If you were worried that you had a broken bone or a tumor, why can't we just go and acknowledge, I'm not sleeping well, my diet seems out of whack, I'm having unusual thoughts. And remember that in the process of diagnosis, and it is a process, it's important that each family member get attended to in the way that they need. We have a middle daughter, Karina, who was often in the shuffle of all the needs in the hospitals and the doctor appointments, who maybe felt neglected. And so just naming that and letting her know that she could come to us, that although their needs may have appeared greater, that she also needed support. And so to offer it, you can't make anyone do anything, but you can lead them and let them know that you're there, that others are there when they're ready.
I think that's a really important point, because whenever you have one child that has any kind of illness or, you know, problem in their lives, and especially if it's ongoing, that other child can be so isolated and so ignored. And as a mom, you only have so many hours in the day and so many resources. That must be tough on you as a parent, saying, okay, these two kids are sometimes in crisis, so they really need extra care. But you see Karina kind of just like, hey, mom, remember me?
Yeah, and I think that's where the community who surrounds you is so important. For me, that was my closest friends that I refer to as my tribe. It was my church community. And I think that when we're willing to extend and name what's happening, that other people are so more willing. We're always afraid of what the other is going to say, but I think that we don't give people the opportunity to respond when we don't allow them in and let them know what's going on.
And this leads us to that bigger issue of, even as a culture, how we need to destigmatize mental illness. Because if your child was going through cancer or any other physical ailment, it would be easier to ask for help. But when it's a mental illness, sometimes I think a lot of people don't want to talk about it because somehow they feel that they'll be judged. Do you see that?
Absolutely, that can happen, right? But I think that when we give people the opportunity to respond compassionately, more people are willing to do that than we'd ever expect. And it's our fear that keeps us back and worried about the one when the 10 might respond positively.
Really quickly, how are Jose and Luke doing today?
Great question. Yeah, each of them are on their path. Jose is in college studying professional and creative writing, which has been a real gift of her disorder. And Luke is finishing his last year of high school and pursuing a career in the trades as a general machinist.
Good to hear. Thank you so much for coming today to share your story. And everybody watching, we need to keep you guys in prayer as you continue this journey, especially Luke and Jose.
Thank you.
If you're going through something right now, you know, what Melody said is so wise about how we all need community. We need those supports around us. You can't do it alone. Whatever it is, and maybe it's something you don't feel free to talk about to those in your life, that's why we have prayer lines that you can call all day and all night. We will not judge you. You don't even have to give your name, but you can get that support of a warm voice going to God on your behalf, asking for help. That number is 1-866-273-4444. Write it down. Use it now or use it any other time where you feel like you just need that extra support. We'll be right back.